Chapter 47. When Eugene opened his eyes, the very first thing he did was check his underwear. He was worried that he might have wet himself, just like Melkith had warned. Fortunately, his underwear was soft and dry. However, Eugene couldn't feel reassured by this fact alone. Mare's gaze, who was standing nearby and looking in his direction, felt somewhat unusual. "Did I do something shameful while I was out?" Eugene asked as he desperately tried to remain calm. "Well, it was a bit shameful for you to faint like that," teased Mare. Eugene bit out, "Apart from that, were you worried that you might have peed your pants?" Mare asked with a mischievous grin. As Eugene felt his heart sinking, he shook his head desperately and said, "There's no way I could have done something like that. Haven't you heard that the truth almost always hurts?" Mare sighed. Please don't feed me such bullshit. Because as I said, there's no way I could have done something like that." Eugene's tone grew even more desperate. Mare finally let up on poor Eugene. "Stop worrying about it. At the very least, you didn't pee your pants, Sir Eugene. Although you did froth at the mouth a bit. So just froth. You also had a bit of a nosebleed. But anyway, haven't I already told you that you didn't wet yourself? Sir Eugene, if you had peed your pants, there's no way I would be standing this close to you. From the way you say that, it seems that there are people who have wet their pants. Of course, there've been quite a lot. The current White Tower Master, Melkith El-Haya, also peed herself, and so did the Blue Tower Master Herodis Usland." Eugene recalled the Blue Tower Master with his uptight face. So that old wizard with an easily offended personality had actually peed himself upon entering witchcraft? He didn't really want to imagine such a sight. "I see, so that means I really didn't wet myself. If that's the case, then it's fine," Eugene said in a relieved tone as he got to his feet. How much time had passed? As he was looking around for a clock with this question in mind, Mare suddenly spoke up. "Sir Eugene was passed out for around 2 hours, Mare said, answering his unspoken question. "That means I was out for quite a while," Eugene murmured in surprise. "So how was it?" Mare asked, her eyes lighting up as she waited for his impressions. However, Eugene found it almost impossible to describe his reaction to all that he had just seen and felt. Difficult, Eugene eventually chose to begin with this word. And arduous. I don't even know what I was looking. No, I think I can vaguely understand what I saw. However, I'm finding it difficult to accept it as the truth, or as even just a theory. Of course that's the case, Mare declared in approval. Mare truly appreciated Eugene's heartfelt impression. Archwizards who held an overflowing pride in their skills and knowledge rarely gave their honest impression after experiencing the contents of witchcraft. That's exactly why witchcraft and the one who made it, Lady Sienna, are so amazing, Mare proudly affirmed. That's right, Eugene admitted, not denying such a fact. Or rather, he couldn't deny it. Even though he had wholeheartedly believed that Sienna was the greatest wizard, he had still been curious about what had made her so amazing that even the other wizards were forced to rate her so highly. Such thoughts couldn't be helped. Eugene, no, Hamel knew Sienna extremely well. Not as the archwizard, the wise Sienna, but as Sienna Meridian, the person who had once been his comrade. He was all too aware of how clumsy, rude and foul-mouthed she could be, as well as how good she was at getting on other people's nerves due to her overinflated ego. Though I guess she deserves to have such an ego. Eugene turned his head back to look at witchcraft. To be honest, if he relied on self-study, it didn't feel like he would be able to understand witchcraft even if he struggled for the rest of his life. The movements of the circles were truly mesmerizing, Eugene mumbled to himself. As she heard Eugene's mutters, Mare's eyes lit up. "Ho?" Looking at Eugene deep in thought, Mare smiled. Indeed. He must have good eyes to see that witchcraft can't be compared to all the magic he has learned up until now. And it seems that his comprehension is also pretty good, Mare quietly analyzed Eugene. "That circle, just what the hell was that?" Eugene asked as he rubbed away the dried blood left from his nosebleed. The most surprising and incomprehensible thing in witchcraft, that circle, was the very essence of the magic formula taught by witchcraft. Eugene knew what a circle was. It had been 300 years since Sienna established the circle magic formula. Over these past hundreds of years, Aratha's wizards had spent that time exploring the circle's capabilities, improving its functions and developing new versions. In this current era, it wasn't just in Arath but most of the wizards in the world who had started practicing magic through the circles. In other words, circles had become popularized because they were easy to understand and learn. Even the introductory books on magic that Eugene had read were all able to describe circles in a detailed way that was also easy to understand. Although he had read more than a dozen of such books back at the Red Tower of Magic, the description of the circles given across these many magic texts were mostly similar. "And what exactly was it that you saw?" Mare asked with a mischievous smile. It seemed that she really wanted to hear more of Eugene's evaluation, or more precisely his amazement at Sienna's accomplishments. So Sienna must have already been like that even when she was young, Eugene realized. Mare had said that she had been created using Sienna's childhood personality as a basis. The Sienna whom Eugene knew had also enjoyed listening to other people's gobsmacked impressions as a way of fluffing her own ego. "That circle. It just kept multiplying," Eugene said as he rubbed his aching head. "But the circles I know, they only go up to the 9th circle." The 9th circle. These days there were no wizards who had managed to reach the 9th circle. Even the Tower Masters, who were seen as the forefront of magic, were limited to the 8th circle, and even Helmuth's black wizards, who had signed a personal contract with the Demon King, could not cross the wall into the 9th circle. The 9th circle was the final step of the circle's magic formula. Although Eugene had seen this line written down in the many books of magic that he had read, only the wise Sienna had actually been able to reach the 9th circle after the circle's magic formula had been established. "Witchcraft is the last grimoire that Lady Sienna ever made," Mare declared, placing her hands firmly on her hips as she looked at Eugene. When she had first created the circle's magic formula, Lady Sienna was already at the 9th circle. However, Lady Sienna continued to focus on researching and training her magic. And just like that, she surpassed the limits that she had set herself. Eugene surmised, "If it's after the 9th circle, then that means that there's a 10th circle? Are you an idiot, Sir Eugene?" Mare rudely asked. He was just making a guess based on simple arithmetic, but he was forced to hear someone call him an idiot. Eugene put on an offended expression, silently asking her to mind her words, but Mare's expression didn't change from the look of pity that she was giving him. Sir Eugene should also have witnessed the contents of witchcraft firsthand. "You shouldn't have fainted before the demonstration reached the 10 circles, right?" Mare asked doubtfully. "I saw what happened after that," Eugene admitted. "From the moment that the 10 circles split apart, their mana started intertwining with each other, forming a single huge circle. Then inside that circle, countless circles were multiplying, dividing, and intertwining. That right there was the core truth of witchcraft." Then, as if she had been waiting for this, Mare raised her finger like a lecturer calling for attention. "It's called the eternal whole. The ultimate end goal of the circle's magic formula that only Lady Sienna has been able to reach. Since witchcraft was released, numerous wizards have attempted to recreate the eternal whole, but none have managed to break through the wall into the 9th circle." Eugene listened patiently. "Without wasting even a single point of your mana, you need to contain all your mana within a giant series of circles, then split them apart and recombine them to form a new one. This could be said to form the most efficient and amplifying model of a circle. And it's not as complicated as a conventional circle." "You're saying that it isn't complicated?" "Something like that. Although it's difficult to create an eternal whole, it's actually very simple and easy to cast magic through it. Didn't I tell you this before? An optimized mana application system for circles that amplifies the magical power created by a circle, simplifying any technique, increasing its efficiency as well as removing the need for an incantation. Allowing multiple castings of the same spell through a single casting and imprinting spells into your subconscious mind to save them for later use. If you can create an eternal whole, you can do all of these as naturally as breathing," Mare assured Eugene while also bringing up an example. "A fireball cast through an eternal hole is stronger than a hellfire spell cast at the 9th circle. At the same time, it doesn't require such vicious consumption of mana as a hellfire, and its casting technique still isn't any more complicated than before. If I can create an eternal hole, can I even cast 9th circle spells without incantations?" Eugene asked curiously. "Of course that's the case, but you won't have any need for that. Since you can reproduce the power of a hellfire spell with only a fireball, why would you even need to use hellfire? It would be easier to just keep throwing fireballs. Of course, if you do need even more power than that, it might be better to cast hellfire, but by the time that Lady Sienna had created the eternal whole, she never once felt the need to use hellfire. By then she was no longer trying to conquer the castles of the demon kings. Nor was she fighting the demon kings and other high-ranking demon folks. Following the oath, the world had been at peace, so Sienna was no longer living such an action-packed life as she had when they were wandering through Helmuth. You should have figured it out by now, right? Mare asked as she waved her upheld finger left and right. For Lady Sienna to be assassinated by black wizards, there's no way such a thing would happen. By creating the eternal whole, Lady Sienna could be said to have become invincible. Although she didn't confirm it personally, she could probably have slain a demon king all on her own. Maybe, Eugene said, unable to deny those words. Sienna, with whom he had wandered around Helmuth together, was already an incredibly powerful wizard, but it seemed that she had become even stronger after the end of the war with the demon kings. Eugene's basic understanding couldn't fully comprehend the greatness of witchcraft. However, he could tell that Sienna, who had made witchcraft, was far stronger than her previous self that Eugene remembered from her days out in the field. The others had probably done the same except for one. What Mare literally said is, there's a saying that the truth is mostly cruel. I've changed it to a version more familiar to Western audiences. In the history of the Lionheart clan, Vermouth was the only one to have reached the 10th star of the White Flame formula. He was already peerlessly strong even when they were in Helmuth, but Eugene wasn't sure what had come over Vermouth to make him so obsessed with bearing children. Vermouth, from Eugene's memories, wasn't such an idle person. If you just tried a little harder, you could be a lot better than you are now. Those were the words he had heard from Vermouth so very long ago. Those words were the ones that had left the deepest scars on his heart during the entirety of his previous life. Vermouth, that son of a bitch, even though he was already a genius, had also put in quite a lot of hard work. However, compared to the amount of effort he had put in, the results he had achieved were just excessive. Anise and Molen should also have gotten a bit stronger. Although he wasn't able to confirm their achievements with his own eyes, as he had with Sienna, Eugene was confident of this fact. His comrades from his previous life were all just those sorts of people. They were all so talented that they could be called geniuses no matter what era they had been born in, and they all had clear goals and convictions. And they had all sworn together to wipe out the demon kings from this world. But that's what makes me even more worried, Eugene muttered to himself in a low voice as he got to his feet. Sienna Meridian. If you were that strong then. Sienna, who I knew would definitely have found some way to challenge the demon kings once more. The demon king of incarceration and the demon king of destruction. These two demon kings were so powerful that the demon kings of lower ranks couldn't even be compared to them. But even if they were defeated because of that, the companions that Eugene was familiar with weren't the type to fall into despair. On the contrary, after increasing their strength and regaining their confidence, even if victory wasn't certain, they were definitely the type to once again risk their lives for their convictions before they died. So for those guys to have not gone to challenge the demon kings once more until the very end. And for Sienna and Anise to have gone into hiding at around the same time. And for them to have no interactions with the Lionheart clan before Vermouth's funeral. Vermouth, Eugene let out a long sigh as he shook his head. Just what on earth were you planning? Although Akron, as the Royal Library, had a nominal library director, there was no closing time as most of the library's operation was left to the familiars. In other words, as long as you gave up on time spent eating and sleeping, you could stay in Akron for as long as you wanted. If that's the case, it would be good if they had a separate location like a break room, Eugene wished. The library in the Red Tower of Magic was much more convenient in this regard. It had both the cafeteria and bedrooms prepared nearby. But unfortunately, there was no space for such things in Akron. He didn't know whether it was because they didn't want the smell of food spreading through the air or if they wanted to maintain a dignity worthy of its title as the Royal Library, but it was strictly forbidden to eat and drink inside Akron. Fortunately, there were separate research wings attached to the halls on each floor, where you could go to study and experiment with magic. If that was the case, shouldn't it be all right for him to eat and sleep there? Although Eugene asked Mare about this fact. Even though I can't eat and it's impossible for me to drink anything, are you really going to do something like that in front of me? Mare protested. There's absolutely no way. If you're hungry, just go outside to eat. Mare had only offered such a petty denial. Are you really saying that such acts are forbidden because of a frivolous reason like that? Eugene asked in disbelief. Of course not. There are definitely reasons behind these restrictions. Since Sir Eugene isn't a pure wizard, he might not be aware of this, but ordinary wizards, No, even wizards who can be called archwizards are basically magic addicts, Mare replied, shaking her head vigorously. If we don't draw a clear line like this, the wizards who enter this place might become so engrossed in magic that they even risk shortening their lifespans to stay here longer. Isn't that why such stories are famous? Stories about wizards who became liches in order to keep researching magic after their deaths. And about wizards who died from overwork while immersed in research within their dungeons. I thought that such stories had an element of exaggeration mixed into them, Eugene said doubtfully. If there wasn't a precedent, we wouldn't have any reason to make such a rule, no? Mare lowered her voice. Intent on creating a gloomy atmosphere, she quietly whispered, Akron has a long history tracing back to around 800 years. A long, long time ago, a certain wizard managed to obtain Akron's entry pass, which he had longed for all his life. He truly loved magic and was fascinated by the truths found in the research of his great and respected seniors. And just like that, he indulged in magic while forgetting to eat, drink, and sleep until eventually. So what, does he come out at night as a ghost? Eugene asked, his tone skeptical. He could appear, Mare insisted. Though I've never actually seen him myself. Wow, so scary. Faced with Eugene's dry reaction, Mare pouted her lips. I'll be back tomorrow, Eugene said as he turned to leave. Mare tilted her head in curiosity. Why are you coming back here? The magic texts in this hall should be too difficult for you, Sir Eugene. If they're hard, then I just need to keep learning, Eugene declared confidently. I'm not going to teach you anything, Mare warned him. That's fine, because other than you, there is someone who can teach me. If that's the case, it's fine, but if you make too much noise, I'm still kicking you out. Mare said this with a tone of setting down an ultimatum. Eugene smirked and nodded in agreement. I'll do my best to be quiet, he promised. Honestly speaking, Eugene was experiencing some internal conflict. He wanted to keep getting to know her and even become friends with Mare, who exceedingly resembled Sienna. However, he didn't think it would be right to transfer that kind of affection to her. It wouldn't be correct, and it wouldn't be fair to Mare either. After all, Mare was a familiar. She wasn't Sienna herself. Mare's existence was also causing Eugene to become overly conscious of his past life. So Eugene didn't want to get any closer to Mare than was absolutely needed. However, things weren't going as he had planned. Just taking today as an example, there were several times when Eugene had seen glimpses of Sienna in Mare's behavior. But I can't just act like I don't know her either. If he really wanted to keep his distance, the best and simplest thing to do was not go to Sienna's hall any longer. But Eugene didn't want to go that far. Because aside from the existence of Mare, he also wanted to indulge himself in witchcraft and the other magical texts stored inside. Before going down to the first floor, taking Mare's advice, Eugene looked around the lower floors. Although there were also familiars on these floors, they didn't have a personality or an artificial intelligence guiding them, so they could only answer a few simple questions and maintain their assigned halls. There were no familiars as human-like as Mare. Though the difficulty is the same. Following the mechanical guidance of the familiars, Eugene had looked at the magic books on display. Even if it wasn't as much as witchcraft, which was impossible for Eugene to understand currently, the difficulty of these books was the same as the other magic texts that he had seen in Sienna's hall. When he arrived on Akron's first floor, a voice called out to Eugene, "You sure were late to come back down." It was Malkith, who still hadn't returned to her own affairs and was just waiting there for him. "So how was it?" another voice asked. Lovelian was there as well. Up until just now, he'd had a frown on his face, but from the moment he saw Eugene, he was walking over with a bright smile as he asked this question. "Truthfully speaking, I'm not really sure what I saw," Eugene replied as he shook his head. "Based on the magic theory that I've learned so far, I think it will take me several years just to properly understand a single one of those magic books. Of course that's the case. Because the magic books stored here are the distillation of Aratha's hundreds of years of magic," Malkith responded with a smirk. While glancing at Wmoid, which was hanging from Eugene's waist, she continued speaking, "Kid, no matter how smart you might be, there's a limit to the amount of magic you can learn without a proper teacher." Lovelian interjected from the side, "White Tower Master." "Ah, like I said, you don't need to worry," Malkith assured him. "I have no intention of taking that kid as my disciple. I want to make a plain and simple deal with him." "For Wmoid?" Eugene asked, although the answer was obvious. At this question, as if she had just been waiting for this, Melkith immediately nodded vigorously. As long as you lend me WYD for a bit, I'll explain 10 volumes of magic text to you in a way that's easy for you to understand. Doesn't that sound like a good deal? Melkith persuaded him. It does sound good, but... Eugen turned his gaze away from Melkith and met Lovelian's eyes. Sir Lovelian, may I ask if you have any intention of making me your disciple? At these words, the two Tower Masters' faces underwent drastic changes. Lovelian's face lit up with a smile, while Melkith's face twisted into a grimace. If that is what you desire, Eugene, there's no way I can turn you down, right? Lovelian welcomed him cheerfully. But aren't you very busy? Melkith objected. Lovelian insisted, if it's for Eugene, no matter how long it lasts, I can make the time for him. Melkith turned towards Eugene, and as for you, kiddo, no matter how desperate you are, you shouldn't bow your head so easily. Besides, aren't you a Lionheart? Is it really okay for you to enter a master-disciple relationship of your own volition? Any more objections? Eugene just sighed. There's also me, Melkith quickly added. Since I'm here, you don't need to enter a master-disciple relationship so carelessly. You might encounter some pointless annoyances later. What will you do if the Red Tower Master does something bad to you after you've already taken him as your teacher? Don't say such nonsense, Lovelian huffed. Eugene expressed his faith in the man, the head wizard Lovelian that I know isn't that type of person. Melkith narrowed her eyes in frustration. You annoying brat, you're only 17 years old. Do you really think you know the Red Tower Master better than I do? Why do you keep spouting such ridiculous nonsense? Lovelian asked with narrowed eyes. Unable to come up with another answer, Melkith chewed her lips for a moment before finally letting out a deep sigh. Fine then. If you do become the Red Tower Master's disciple, you won't need me to explain those magic texts in exchange for lending me WED. Although admitting this really hurts my self-esteem, the Red Tower Master's magic skills are better than mine, all right? Melkith reluctantly confessed. We don't necessarily need to trade for guidance on those magic books, Eugene said with an amused shrug. Don't you have anything else that's worth trading for? Items can work just as well. Melkith's jaw fell halfway in shock at this bold statement. After staring at Eugene for a few moments, she burst into laughter as she shook her head. The latest understudies are on underfiv.website. This kid really knows how to cut a deal, Melkith commented sarcastically. If you don't want to, that's fine with me, Eugene casually replied. Who says that I don't want to? Melkith responded immediately as she rubbed her chin. Just let me think for a moment. Chapter 48. Even in his previous life, Eugene had never disliked accepting freebies. No matter how much he hated someone, as long as they were offering him something useful, he would still accept it. Besides, Eugene didn't really have any hard feelings towards Melkith. Anyways, I shouldn't have any need to use WYD for the time being. Of course, Eugene couldn't just decide to loan WED all on his own accord. The Storm Sword was a treasure that belonged to the Lionheart's direct line. Eugene was currently only borrowing it for a while. Though I don't think the Patriarch will say that it's not allowed. Although he felt that he still needed to first ask for permission, Eugene wasn't really afraid that Gilead would turn down this proposal. Despite being the patriarch of the Lionheart clan, which heavily valued tradition, Gilead Lionheart had shown several times that he was more invested in being realistic and pursuing the clan's best interests than in protecting such outdated traditions. And it wasn't like they were just handing WYD over to Melkith. Gilead shouldn't have any reason to refuse if they could get something of value in return for lending it out for a few days if they could get that promise recorded in clear writing. And this works out for me as well. Even as Eugene considered all this, Melkith was also lost in thought. She was busy recalling all the various artifacts she had collected for herself, as well as any magic books which were exclusively kept by the White Tower of Magic. The magic books aren't valuable enough, Melkith judged. Since Eugene was allowed entrance into Akron, the magic books belonging exclusively to the White Tower of Magic were no longer of great value to him. How about a staff? Melkith suddenly spoke up. Kid, you don't have a staff yet, right? Although you might feel like you can already use magic quite well even without a staff. That's just because all the magic you've learned so far has been simple. Is that so? Eugene responded politely. Of course that's the case, Melkith insisted. Did you think that wizards carried around staffs just to look cool? With the aid of a staff, you can easily fine-tune your mana, simplifying all your spellcasting techniques. Eugene. I have a lot of fine staffs in my collection as well, Lovelian immediately interjected. Truthfully speaking, he was reluctant to allow Melkith to borrow WMD. Although it wasn't guaranteed that she would be able to summon the Wind Spirit King just because she was using WMD as a catalyst. What if Melkith truly did succeed in signing a contract with the Wind Spirit King? The White Tower Master, Melkith Al-Haya, was already the greatest spirit summoner in the history of magic. Before her, no other spirit summoner had managed to sign contracts with two Spirit Kings. If the Spirit King of the Wind was added to that, the power held by the White Tower of Magic would become far too strong. As the Red Tower Master, Lovelian didn't want the balance of power between the towers to collapse. Who knew what would happen if Melkith, who was already so free-spirited and self-righteous, held more power than the other Tower Masters? With her personality, she won't want to be involved in Aratha's day-to-day affairs, but it still isn't good to allow too much power to be focused on one Tower Master, Lovelian believed. A current example of this was the Black Tower Master Balzac Ludbeth. Even in Arath, he needed to be treated with special consideration. This was because of the Demon King of Incarceration, who had signed a contract with Balzac and thrown his support behind the Black Tower Master. Balzac was both the Black Tower Master and at the same time Helmuth's ambassador. Why do you have to keep trying to get in my way? Melkith demanded. Lovelian replied with a question of his own. Why do you have to keep being so greedy when you already have contracts with two Spirit Kings? This old man. Do you think that I don't know what you're really afraid of? Are you truly that worried that I might wreak havoc after signing a contract with the Wind Spirit King? So you're well aware then. Hey, even though we've known each other for decades, do you still not know me that well? Can't you see that I've got no interest in the headache that's meddling in Aratha's state of affairs? Although you can say that now once you obtain too much power it might end up twisting you. Lovelian didn't raise his voice. He just continued to stare at Melkith with calm eyes, and Melkith was unable to refute him and could only grind her teeth in frustration. You really are an amazing patriot. Since when were you so devoted to Arath? Melkith asked sarcastically. Lovelian calmly replied, I just don't want to step aside and allow further disturbances to break out. Balzac alone is enough to give me a headache. Ha. From how you're acting, someone might think that Balzac really was up to something. Melkith snorted in amusement. Lovelian sophies, although I'm well aware of how much you detest black wizards, sometimes you just go too far. Don't you think you should avoid misjudging people because of your preconceptions? Preconceptions. Lovelian's lips twisted into a mocking smile. I lost my family due to a black wizard's attempted human experimentation. Right in front of my eyes, I was forced to watch as my mother, father, and sister writhed around as parts of a single chimera. If my master hadn't saved me, I too would have undergone the exact same thing to become part of that chimera. Ugh, Melkith grimaced. So isn't it only natural for me to detest black wizards and to have preconceptions about them? Lovelian pressed. I've put my foot in my mouth. Sorry, Melkith apologized. You have the right to detest black wizards. However, Balzac is still innocent, isn't he? I can't be sure of that. With a snort, Lovelian shook his head. Can you really say for certain that Balzac isn't the mastermind behind the filth that goes on in Bolero Street? These days, several people go missing from Bolero Street each year. Such disappearances aren't just taking place on Bolero Street, but in various other places throughout Arath as well. There's no evidence that the black wizards are behind those, Melkith weakly argued. Of course there isn't. That's why I haven't attempted to interrogate Balzac either. But there's one fact that we just can't ignore. As far as I know, the only ones who enjoy kidnapping strangers are the black wizards. It's none of my concern whether you hate black wizards or are suspicious of Balzac, Melkith spat out as she rallied her anger. I know what you're trying to guard against. However, I swear on my mana that I have no desire to abuse my power and make a mess. Even if I do manage to sign a contract with the Wind Spirit King, I won't do anything that disgraces my position as the White Tower Master. All right then, Lovelian easily accepted. What? Melkith struggled to respond. If you've sworn on your mana, then I guess I'll just have to trust you, isn't that right? Lovelian smiled warmly as if his cold attitude from earlier was merely for show. Seeing this, Melkith couldn't help but click her tongue. This fox-like old man. Don't be too offended. If I had just plainly asked you to swear an oath, would you really have agreed to do so? Lovelian asked her. Malkuth found herself unable to come up with any denials and could only raise her clenched fists in anger. If she had her way, she really wanted to go up to Lovelian, grab him by his collar and squeeze his throat until his tonsils popped out. But of course, Lovelian recalled. The choice is still up to Eugene. My apologies for going off topic. It's fine, Eugene said politely. He didn't feel particularly offended by Lovelian's cautious attitude. Instead, he was more concerned about the head wizard's suspicions regarding Balzac. After all, Eugene felt the same distaste that Lovelian did for black wizards. When he first met with Balzac due to the previous incident with Uid, Balzac had drawn a line between himself and other black wizards, saying he had never committed any crimes. Eugene definitely couldn't believe these words. All the black wizards he had ever known turned out to be right sons of bitches. I've been thinking about it, but I don't really want a staff, Eugene admitted. If anyone heard you say that, they'd think I was just giving it to you. Kid, I'm just lending it to you. You got that? Malkuth insisted. Allow me to say this in advance, but I will only be able to lend WED to you for a few days, Eugene clarified. But if that means I will only be able to borrow one of the artifacts that head wizard Malkuth owns for a few days at most, then we might as well not go through with it. Just as I thought, you really are an annoying brat, Malkuth growled, her shoulders heaving in anger as she turned to look at Lovelian and then Eugene. Now that she looked back on it, it appeared that the two of them had already worked out what to say in order to take advantage of her. Let's trade 1 year per day, Malkuth spat out. And that's the best offer you're going to get. If you lend me WNYD for 1 day, I will lend you one of my artifacts for a whole year. So if I lend you WNYD for a week, you let me borrow whatever it is for 7 years? Eugene confirmed. Malkuth grudgingly acknowledged, that's right. With some surprise, Eugene asked, do you really have to go that far just because you want to borrow WE? Don't make me repeat myself over and over again. I have to make a contract with the Wind Spirit King no matter what. Malkuth shouted with a growl of frustration. Having already confessed her desire, Malkuth didn't restrain herself any longer and continued. What I'm saying is that ever since I became a spirit summoner, all I've ever wanted was to sign a contract with the Wind Spirit King. The Lightning Spirit King and the Earth Spirit King are great, but I have to make a contract with the Wind Spirit King. Why? Eugene asked bluntly. Why else? Because the Great Vermouth was the last one to have made a contract with the Wind Spirit King. Malkuth shouted once more. None of the great spirit summoners who managed to contract spirit kings before me were able to make a contract with the Wind Spirit King. Although you might not be aware of this, among the spirit summoners like me, the Wind Spirit King is, he's like a dream for us. This might not register with you because you were born to the Lionheart clan, but like how some wizards revere the wise Sienna, some spirit summoners greatly respect the Great Vermouth. 1. Rather than fox, the Korean version of this insult uses a species of snake. 2. The original Korean version of the idiom describes it as squeezing out the thrush in his throat. And what about Hamel? Why would you bring up stupid Hamel here? No, well, I just feel like he's also a great person worthy of respect. Why should I hold any respect for him? Just grab any passers-by and ask them. Between the Great Vermouth, the wise Sienna, and the stupid Hamel, if you ask them to pick the one they most respected, as long as they're not some lying attention seeker, there's no way they'd say they respect Hamel. Cough. Lovelian let out a low cough at Malkuth's outburst. As Gilead's words about how he most liked Hamel ran through his mind, the Red Tower Master hesitantly spoke up. Ahem. Eugene, if you don't have any desire for a staff then. Malkuth interrupted him. Hey, you don't say anything pointless and just keep quiet. Ignoring her, Lovelian continued. Among the artifacts collected by the White Tower Master, there's one that's extremely rare and precious. I told you to shut up. Malkuth screeched. As if something was responding to her cry, her curly hair started to rise upwards as an electric current surged through it. It is strictly forbidden to commit any acts of violence within Akron, Lovelian reminded her. Malkuth threatened him, as long as you don't spout any nonsense, I won't need to do anything violent. What nonsense? Lovelian defended himself. I'm just going to give Eugene some advice so that he can make an informed choice. I'm also quite curious about what he has to say, Eugene spoke up with a grin. Eugene also wanted to see Melkith summon the Wind Spirit King Tempest. But if he could also get a rare treasure on top of that, he'd be bursting with happiness. Lovelian began, well, there's this artifact called the Cloak of Darkness. I said shut up. Melkith repeated once more. Why do you sound so upset? When, as far I know, you haven't even used the Cloak of Darkness once in these last 10 years. Do you know how much I went through to get my hands on that cloak? Isn't it better to lend it to someone who needs it and get what you want in return instead of just leaving it lying around and used except for ornamental purposes? Once again Melkith was left speechless. She dug her fingers into her floating hair as she was caught in frustrated anguish. What exactly is the Cloak of Darkness? Eugene asked curiously. It's just a winter cloak. Since it's got fur all over it, it's quite warm. That's all there is to it, Melkith stammered as she avoided giving a real explanation, but Lovelian was kind enough to explain in detail. You know about Geddon's shield stored in the Lionheart treasure vault, right? Lovelian confirmed. Although it's not really on the same level, the cloak can do something similar. If you direct a frontal attack into the inside of the cloak, you can redirect it back in any direction you want. It's not that versatile, Melkith desperately tried to downplay it. Strictly speaking, it relies on a rebound instead of a reflection. If you don't calculate the spatial coordinates correctly and guide the path of the attack with mana, you won't really be able to send the attack back in the direction you want it to go. In any case, it has some of the highest levels of spatial magic. You might not be able to get familiar with it right away, but if it's with your talents, Eugene, I believe that you'll be able to use it soon enough, Lovelian assured him. You just why do you keep blowing such hot air? Does the Cloak of Darkness really look all that easy to grab? Melkith's shoulders trembled as they heaved up and down. That's not the only way you can use it, Lovelian continued, ignoring Melkith's latest outburst. The outer surface of the cloak is also enchanted with high-level defensive spells. You can easily block an offensive spell of the 5th circle just by wearing it. But that also depends on your own mana, Melkith sulkily added. All in all, it's a very convenient artifact. Also, Eugene, do you still enjoy using various different weapons? Lovelian asked, showing no signs of having heard Melkith. The head wizard recalled the bloodline continuation ceremony he had spectated a few years ago. Although the current Eugene only wielded WYD by itself, during the bloodline continuation ceremony, Eugene had skillfully wielded both a shield and a sword together. Not only that, he had heard from Gilead that Eugene was also very good at handling spears. Eugene pretended modesty. Well, it's not like I use multiple weapons just for the fun of it. But if I have them, I'll use them. Though I currently only have WYD on me since it's inconvenient to carry multiple weapons. If that's the case, you'll really love the Cloak of Darkness. That cloak also has the highest levels of subspace magic imbued into it. There's nothing complicated about it. Just put some things into the cloak. And then you can take them out whenever you need them, Lovelian revealed dramatically. This son of a bitch. Melkith cursed as she raised despair-filled eyes to glare at Lovelian. That sounds great, Eugene nodded his approval with a broad grin. Let's trade for the Cloak of Darkness instead of a staff. But not right now. I still need to request permission from the main family. I still haven't agreed to this, Melkith spat out with desperation in her heart. However, Melkith was the one who had the most to lose by not making this deal, not Eugene. Or at least that was how Melkith felt. Even in her dreams, Melkith couldn't have imagined the fact that Eugene was extremely eager to speak with Tempest once more. If you don't want to, then it can't be helped, Eugene shrugged nonchalantly. Anyways, I used too much brain power upstairs, so now I'm starving. Head Wizard Lovelian, if it's okay with you, would you like to have a meal together? We can talk about what I need to do as your disciple. Lovelian accepted the offer. That sounds good to me. Although it isn't that close to here, I know of a nice restaurant situated up in the sky in one of the floating stations. Although the food there is delicious, the night view seen from its windows is even better than the food. Wow. Come to think of it, I still haven't gotten to see the night view that's called one of Aratha's crown jewels. If so, then that's great. Allow me to call an aerial carriage for us immediately. Ignoring Melkith, Eugene and Lovelian got to know each other better as they exchanged chit-chat. Melkith had just been glaring at this sight, but now she gritted her teeth and dropped her head in surrender. Fine, I get it, Melkith reluctantly admitted defeat. Oh, you were still here? Eugene asked in surprise. He was just as he appeared, a cheeky brat. As Melkith glared at Eugene, she clenched her fists. Melkith struggled to spit out the words, "The cloak of darkness. That's what you want, I'll lend it to you. There's no need to rush. Haven't I already told you that I need to ask permission from the main family?" As Eugene replied with a shake of his head, Melkith was unable to endure it any longer and started releasing shrill screams of rage. "Kaiawea. Kaiawea. Akioa. I could almost think that you were a crow." As Eugene shook his head in pity, he backed away from her. Just as Eugene had expected, Gilead made no objections to loaning WNYD. However, he did attach conditions. They absolutely could not risk destroying WNYD during that time, and an observer from the Lionheart clan would be attached to Melkith for the duration she was borrowing WNYD. An observer? Melkith asked. Having visited him in the early morning hours, a few days after they had last talked, Melkith's face didn't look all that good. Perhaps because she'd been under a lot of stress for the past few days, the dark circles under her eyes were very deep. Melkith continued, "Will the Patriarch be coming personally?" "Nope," Eugene answered. "Then who will be coming?" "Is it that guy, the Patriarch's younger brother, Guillaume Lionheart?" "How did you know that?" "The Patriarch of the Lionheart clan's main family wouldn't be so carefree as to be called here and there on various matters. Since he's already been called to Aroth recently because of his wastrel son, it would be ridiculous for him to return for something like this," Melkith grumbled as she unclasped the collar of her cloak. "Is that the cloak of darkness?" Eugene asked, pointing to the cloak that Melkith was wearing. She had said that it was warm because it was covered in fur, which was exactly how this cloak appeared. "Cool, isn't it?" Melkith bragged with mixed feelings. "I think it would look cooler if I wore it than when head wizard Melkith wears it," Eugene teased. "I've always felt like you were an annoying brat, but this is—" "Don't get too upset. Since we're doing business with each other, wouldn't it be better if there were smiles all around?" "Shut it. So then when will the Patriarch's younger brother be arriving?" "They said that he'd be here sometime around noon today. But Sir Guillaume isn't the only one who's coming." "Then who else is tagging along?" Melkith narrowed her eyes as she carefully brushed the fur on the cloak. "The Lionheart clan's guardians will also be accompanying him," Eugene replied with a TSK. "This will be the first time loaning out a treasure of the main family, and they're also here to take a look at it's my older brother's incident." "The guardians?" Melkith's narrowed eyes softened as she tried to recall the term. After a moment's thought, Melkith smiled and nodded. "Oh, that's right. You're talking about the hunting dogs of the Lionheart clan, right?" Calling them hunting dogs. Although the guardians wouldn't appreciate these words, Eugene's opinion of them wasn't all that different from Melkith's. The guardians of the family commandments, the Lionheart clan's black lions. Although that's what they were called, the guardian's role was no different from that of hunting dogs. If a child from the collateral lines who had not attended a bloodline continuation ceremony were to train their mana or pick up a real sword, or if the white flame formula, which was meant to be learned exclusively by the main family, was taught to a collateral descendant, the guardians would appear to deliver the judgment for their crimes. And as for black magic, Eugene recalled, the practice of black magic was strictly forbidden by the Lionheart clan's commandments. Although Ewed hadn't succeeded in practicing black magic, it was true that he had tried to start learning black magic. As such, the guardians had decided to visit Aroth to investigate this matter closely. Guillaume Lionheart, the still unmarried younger brother of the Patriarch, was a member of the Lionheart clan's Black Lions. Chapter 49. The current Patriarch of the Lionheart's main family had two younger brothers. The relationship between the three brothers was calm, and the eldest son, Gilead, had ascended to the position of Patriarch without having to shed even a single drop of blood. In addition to the simple prioritization of seniority, Gilead's skills at that time were superior to his brothers. And Gilead's two younger brothers hadn't held much interest in the position of the Patriarch. The second son, Guilford Lionheart, whose skills fell short compared to both his older and younger brothers, had given up on the position of the Patriarch at an early age and searched instead for his own happiness. From what Eugene could recall, Guilford Lionheart was a middle-aged man with a slightly protruding belly, though not as much as Gerhardt's. According to the rumors, he had played around quite a bit when he was young, but although they hadn't gotten to know each other all that well, Guilford hadn't seemed like such a bad person to Eugene. Guilford had left the main estate earlier this year and established his own household in a secluded and peaceful country estate. Unlike Gilead and Guilford, Guillaume Lionheart had never gotten married, nor did he wish to be married. Eugene had personally asked Guillaume about his reasons for this a few years ago. Marriage? Of course, it's an admirable and beautiful thing. However, if I wanted to get married and have children, I would have to part ways with the main family before any of my children turned 5. I would hate to have to do that. And with my personality, I don't think I'd be a great father. Guillaume had a free-spirited personality. He was always sharing a laugh with the knights who served the main family, and his attitude towards the servants was never overbearing. He showed a passion for teaching Seal and Cyan and had even cut down on his free time to instruct the knights. Guillaume was very kind to Eugene in particular. During the 4 years Eugene spent at the main estate, Guillaume had personally instructed Eugene alongside Gilead. At least while Eugene was at the main estate, he had never once been discriminated against just because he was an adopted child from a collateral branch. In Eugene's view, Guillaume was quite a unique individual because of all this. His martial skills were also outstanding. Even the patriarch Gilead had shown respect for Guillaume's skills. However, unlike Gilead, who hadn't been able to focus on his training after having become the patriarch, Guillaume had devoted himself to his training while he wandered around the continent. Due to this, presently Guillaume's skill had actually surpassed Gilead's. That said, Guillaume had never once thought of rebelling against Gilead. Guillaume would never deviate from his role as the patriarch's younger brother. 1 year ago, there was a period when Guillaume was away from the main estate for several months. When he returned, the Lionheart, the personal sigil of the Lionheart clan that Guillaume had also worn on the left chest of his formal dress, was slightly different. It had turned into a sigil of a black lion with its fangs drawn and claws exposed. This showed that Guillaume had become a formal member of the Knights of the Black Lion, the guardians of the Lionheart clan. In fact, this wasn't anything unusual. As long as you had exceptional skills and proven loyalty to the clan, anyone in the Lionheart clan could apply to join the Knights of the Black Lion. The Knights of the Black Lion were stronger and had a sharper edge than the Knights of the White Lion, which consisted of the knights who served the main family. Although this will be my first time seeing them personally, it was getting closer to noon, the appointed time of their arrival. Eugene was feeling a slight excitement as he checked the time. Although he had lived at the main estate for 4 years, he had never once seen a member of the Knights of the Black Lion during all that time. The Knights of the White Lion, who belonged to the Lionheart's direct line, had sworn their loyalty solely to the main family. However, the Knights of the Black Lion weren't sworn to the main family. Instead, their loyalty had been sworn to the Lionheart name as a whole. The guiding force behind the Knights of the Black Lion was the Council of Elders, the group made up of the giants who had left their weighty names in the history of the Lionheart clan, regardless of whether they were from the direct line or the collateral lines. Even the current patriarch, Gilead, did not stand on an equal footing with the elders of the council. It still isn't time yet, Eugene thought impatiently. He couldn't help but be interested in the Knights of the Black Lion. He had spent 4 years at the main estate. Gilead was strong and so was Guillaume. Both of them were strong enough to be recognized for their strength no matter where in the continent they had been placed. The main family's Knights of the White Lion were also strong. Even among the numerous knightly orders that existed on this continent, they were one of a handful of the strongest. Even when the current Knights of the White Lion were compared to the Kiel Empire's knightly orders, while they might be said to be lacking in numbers, they couldn't be said to be lacking in quality. But that alone wasn't enough. Vermouth had been the strongest person in all of humanity's history. That was why he was called the hero and why he had led the subjugation force that sought to slay all the demon kings. Neither the elves, who were long-lived, nor the dragons, who were called masters of magic, had been able to slay a demon king. However, Vermouth was able to kill 3 of the demon kings. Eugene was deeply aware of this fact. Molin, Anise, Sienna, and Hamel, all of them were strong. However, if it wasn't for Vermouth, it would be impossible for them to kill a demon king. Vermouth, whom Hamel had seen and accompanied, and who resided in Eugene's memories, had been so strong that he hadn't even seemed human. That's why it's still not enough. Eugene stood up with a disappointed click of his tongue. Although Gilead and Guillaume were strong, as were the Knights of the White Lion, it wasn't enough for them to truly claim to be Vermouth's successors. Since that was the case, what about the Knights of the Black Lion? Without distinguishing between the main and collateral branches, accepting the most exceptional and loyal clan members who bore the name Lionheart. How strong would such a knightly order be? And what about the council who backed the Knights of the Black Lion? How strong were they? Those old geezers who've retreated into the background. It can't just be for the sake of making room for others, right? Gilead didn't like the traditions of the direct line. Of course, there was the bloodline continuation ceremony, but other traditions meant to absolutely suppress the collateral lines also existed. However, the patriarch's strength alone wasn't enough to change these traditions that had been passed down for over 300 years. Both the Council and the Knights of the Black Lion were part of the guardians of the family commandments that upheld the rules of the Lionheart clan above all else. As guardians, they were required to have the appropriate strength needed to enforce their duties. Eugene hadn't intended for all of this to happen, but he was excited to finally get involved with the Knights of the Black Lion. A gigantic aerial carriage boasting a magnificent splendor landed in front of the Red Tower of Magic. "They sure are throwing their weight around," Malkuth scoffed. She didn't appreciate being placed in such a position, especially when the other party wasn't even a high-ranking personage of Arath. If it wasn't for the sake of Malkuth wouldn't be standing out here, respectfully waiting to welcome these guests. Eugene reminded her, "Didn't you say that you respect Sir Vermouth, the ancestor of the Lionheart clan?" "Kid, don't misquote me," Malkuth corrected him. "The one I respect is the Great Vermouth, not the founder of the Lionheart clan." "Well, aren't they pretty much the same thing?" "It's different. I don't really like the Lionheart clan. I don't like how its main family suppresses its collateral lines nor how their council and their Knights of the Black Lion put on such a secretive act. But for now you should hide such an attitude," Lovelian reminded Malkuth. Unlike Malkuth, Lovelian's expression was calm. While staring at the disembarking carriage he continued, "If you really want to borrow you had better avoid doing anything that might offend them." "Are you really asking me to act all nice and polite?" Malkuth demanded. "If anyone had heard you say that, they might be confused into thinking that I'm not trading with them on an equal footing. With my greatly cherished and adored Cloak of Darkness, I'm actually trading it for It was Eugene's turn to correct her. "It's not really a trade. We're just loaning them to each other. And you remember that we promised a day for a year, right?" Malkuth ground her teeth angrily. But even though she was showing such an expression, she wasn't truly angry. Although she had indeed been angry that day at Akron when she had started screeching like a crow, once she went back to the White Tower of Magic, while clinging tightly to the Cloak of Darkness, she had managed to calm her emotions and think about it rationally. As if it would take me a day. It will probably only take a few hours, maybe half a day at most." Malkuth thought optimistically. Malkuth trusted in her affinity with spirits. Since she would also have the strong catalyst of the Storm Sword with her, there was no reason she wouldn't be able to summon the Wind Spirit King. "That means I'll only be lending the cloak for a few months at most. I can endure it if it's just that much," Malkuth assured herself. In exchange for getting the chance to sign a contract with the Spirit King of the Wind, which Malkuth had longed for ever since she was young, she was loaning out the Cloak of Darkness for just a few months. No matter how much she thought about it, wasn't this a great deal? Of course, Malkuth made sure not to openly reveal such joy. "If I needlessly show my true feelings, that kid might try to change the terms of our deal." Although it had only been a few days since they had first met, Malkuth had already figured out that Eugene was shrewd, nasty, and as stubborn as a pit bull. The door of the aerial carriage finally opened. For such a spacious carriage there were only 5 people riding in it, and the first person to get off was, "What are you doing here?" Eugene demanded. It was Seal. "My mother's birthday is coming soon," Seal said by way of explanation. Since it had only been a few months since they had last met, Seal's appearance couldn't have changed all that much. However, as he was now seeing her in a sharply cut formal dress and her hair tied up in a way that he had never seen her wear before during his time at the main estate, she felt a little unfamiliar to him. "Because of that, I've come to pick out a few presents for her. I was also curious to see if you were doing well," Seal replied with a dry expression that didn't show even a trace of amusement. With this, she narrowed her eyes and waited for Eugene's reaction. However, Eugene didn't seem as surprised or perturbed as Seal had hoped. Is that so?" he asked. And that was it. Seal furrowed her brows, but instead of continuing to block the doorway she stepped aside. Following Seal, Guillaume was the next to emerge. Like the last time Eugene had seen him, The sigil of the Knights of the Black Lion was embroidered on the left side of Guillaume's chest. As soon as Guillaume saw Eugene, he smiled brightly and waved his hand. It really hasn't been long enough since you two last saw each other to feel such joy at your reunion, said the middle-aged man who next emerged from the carriage as he patted Guillaume on the shoulder. That might be the case, but what can I do about feeling so happy at getting to meet Eugene like this? Guillaume asked cheerfully. There'll be enough time for that later, so let's just focus on business for now, the man advised. Although he didn't know who the man was, Eugene could feel he had exceptional skills. But not with a sword. It looks like he uses a spear, Eugene observed. Visit for a better user experience. The man wasn't carrying a weapon. But considering his posture and the way his muscles had developed, Eugene could be certain that he used a spear. 1. The raw text says yesterday instead of that day at Akron, but the states that their first meeting was a few days ago. Taking into account that the Lionheart family may have needed a few days to discuss and arrange things, we have decided to assume that the author just made a mistake in this chapter. Eugene continued to observe the following two people who emerged from the carriage after the spearman. That man's a wizard. Though the Lionheart clan had made a name for itself as a martial clan, it still had a few wizards. Since they were coming here to check on both WNYD's loan and Uad's issue, it was only natural for them to have included a wizard in their group. And behind him, oh my. The last to emerge from the carriage was a woman with her dress uniform's black jacket draped over her shoulders. Seeing as how she was the only one whose dress uniform was unbuttoned and draped over her shoulders while the others were wearing their dress uniforms all neatly buttoned up, it appeared as though she had the highest rank among them. She's strong. But what Eugene noticed before all that was the woman's hands. Although they were covered up by leather gloves, due to the long period of time that had been spent training them as weapons, it was possible to estimate the strength of the woman's hands through their outlines alone. So she doesn't use a sword or a spear. She's a fist fighter. Has it been 20 years? The woman spoke up as she looked straight at Lovelian with a cheerful smile. To be more precise, it's been 23 years, Lovelian corrected her. Has that much time really gone by already? I've heard the news. You're the current Red Tower Master, right? When we last met, I had already told you I would soon become the next Red Tower Master. Did you really? Since so much time has passed, I can't clearly recall it. And I probably wasn't all that interested in the first place. Having said this, the woman turned to look at Eugene. So you're Eugene Lionheart? Yes, ma'am. For now, Eugene decided to just bow his head. My name is Carmen Lionheart. By all accounts, you could consider me your great-aunt, but don't call me that, got it? Yes. Eugene hesitantly responded after a few moments of trying to comprehend Carmen's words. Did she say that she was his great-aunt? But that would mean that this woman was Gilead's aunt. Appearance really isn't everything, Eugene sighed to himself. Among those here, Melkith alone was over 60 years old, and Lovelian was the closest to her age. But even so, these two were able to maintain unbelievably youthful looks at their respective ages, so it was no surprise for Carmen to look so young. However, aside from her youthful appearance, it was her seniority that caused Eugene to feel so surprised that someone like her had come all the way here. The wind is picking up, so why don't we head inside and talk? Lovelian said with a grin. They started making their way to the drawing room located on the top floor of the Red Tower of Magic. On the way there, Eugene was able to pick up a bit more about the members of the Knights of the Black Lion who had made their way here today. Carmen Lionheart, like Guillaume, was the younger sibling of a previous generation's patriarch, and again like Guillaume she hadn't gotten married. After staying at the main estate for quite some time, she transferred to the Knights of the Black Lion. Currently, she was the captain of the 3rd Division of the Knights of the Black Lion. Nashon Lionheart was the man who patted Guillaume on the shoulder. He was one of the commanders in the 3rd Division led by Carmen, and instead of the direct line he came from one of the collateral lines. Falgo Lionheart was the wizard. He likewise belonged to the 3rd Division. He was from a magic-focused branch, which was rare even among the collateral lines, and today he was the one in charge of formalizing the deal with Melkith. Although we've already negotiated the contents of this deal, allow me to confirm them once more, Falgo said as he laid his staff on top of the table. This deal involves the Storm Sword WNYD, which belongs to the Lionheart's main family, and the Cloak of Darkness, which belongs to the White Tower Master. For every day that WNYD is borrowed, the Cloak of Darkness will be loaned out for 1 year. Although the condition has been laid out like this, a day isn't exactly the best unit to measure this by, don't you think? So what do you propose? Melkith asked grudgingly. Falgo offered, a fortnight for an hour. A month for 2 hours. A year for 24 hours. How does that sound? Melkith sarcastically replied, what about the minutes? Although that's possible, I'm afraid it might be a bit cumbersome to do so, Falgo politely admitted. So if I borrow it for 10 minutes, you'll still get to play with my cloak of darkness for an hour, Melkith snorted in exasperation. Right away, it was obvious that such a condition wasn't favorable to her. Please understand our position, Falgo requested. The Storm Sword WED is a sword that was personally used by our ancestor, and it's one of a handful of the rarest treasures in the Lionheart clan's possession. Is that the only condition you're insisting on? Melkith finally asked. Yes, we've already prepared a contract, Falgo said with a sly smile as he pulled out a contract from his pocket. Visit. For the best no_understood experience. The contract then needed to be checked over not just by Melkith but by Eugene as well. What was emphasized in bolded characters was that Melkith was not allowed to risk destroying WE. If that occurs, you must pay the corresponding price. Isn't that rather vague wording? Melkith complained. Falgo explained, we just hope to show our desire for there to be no incidents. Well then, just in case, I would like to hear what would happen if I did destroy WNYD? Melkith insisted on asking. Then you would have to pay for it with your life. The one who replied to Melkith's question was Carmen. Instead of sitting in the seat offered to her, Carmen was sitting on the windowsill as she looked out the window. It was impossible to associate that crooked and rakish appearance with someone who should, by all rights, be Gilead's elderly aunt. Carmen continued, the Storm Sword WE is a treasure of priceless value. If you really want to borrow it, then of course you should be prepared to risk your life. Even though my life also has incalculable value? Melkith asked challengingly. Although that might be the case for Aroth, that doesn't apply to the Lionheart clan, Carmen said in a cold voice as she pulled out a rolled-up cigar. After looking at Carmen staring out the window as she chewed on a cigar, Eugene shook his head. Even though she isn't a teenager anymore. Looking at this pretentious rascal, Eugene was reminded of Cyan from a few years ago. His twin, Seal, had only started showing symptoms of going through puberty this year, but Cyan had begun showing the signs of going through puberty 2 years ago when he was 15. Cyan had started to enjoy wearing the black clothes that he had somehow gotten his hands on, and when he had tried to get into alcohol and cigarettes by stealing them from the footmen, he had been harshly scolded by Ancilla. And what will you do if I say that I won't pay with my life? Melkith challenged her. Now, there's really no need to offer up your life, Falgo intervened while trying to maintain a wavering smile. I have faith in the White Tower Master. I also have respect for you as a fellow wizard. I don't truly believe that the White Tower Master will make such a clumsy mistake of destroying the catalyst while trying to make a contract with the spirit. Melkith snorted, still displeased. Fargo tried to smooth things over. In any case, should WE be destroyed, we will discuss the matter again at that time. Melkith remained unmoved. But what you're saying is that it will still be up to the Lionheart clan to decide first, right? If you don't like it, then give up on borrowing WE, Carmen said as she continued to look out the window while chewing on her cigar. Despite having had it in her mouth for a while, she had yet to light it. The truth is, no one on the Lionheart side is desperate to make this deal. If the Patriarch hadn't personally requested it, I wouldn't even have come here. If someone heard you say that, they'd think you came all the way here because of me, Melkith implied slyly. Of course I've come here for the truly important issue, not this trivial matter. Mumbling this, Carmen took out a pocket watch from her vest. To think she was carrying a pocket watch. Eugene held back the laughter that unconsciously threatened to burst out. It was the first time he had seen someone carrying such an uncomfortable and heavy watch in their vest pocket. If you're going to go around carrying a pocket watch, why are you also wearing a wristwatch? Unlike Eugene, who was holding back his urge to make a retort, Melkith questioned Carmen without any hesitation. Also, why do you keep chewing on a cigar you haven't even lit? I've made an appointment to visit the Black Tower of Magic in an hour from now, Carmen said, refusing to respond to Melkith's retorts. I need to have a conversation with Balzac Ludbeth about the incident with Uid. And after that, I will be accompanying him to Aroth's prison. Why go to the prison? Melkith asked. To interrogate the cheeky black wizard who dared to teach black magic to the eldest son of the Lionheart clan. These words were the complete opposite of Gilead's previous response. Gilead had said that he would allow Aratha's laws to hold precedence in judging Gavid's case. That seems to be a bit different from what Gilead had decided. Even Lovelian couldn't allow such behavior to go unchallenged after hearing these words. He was a longtime friend of Gilead, and his sympathies laid with the Lionheart clan. But even so, Lovelian was Aratha's Red Tower master. He couldn't simply overlook it when a powerful clan from a foreign country talked about ignoring Aratha's laws. Although the Patriarch may have made his decision, the council has reached a different decision. The name of the Lionheart clan was dirted due to the previous incident. The person who caused such filth to tarnish our name needs to be held accountable, Carmen stated with a smirk as she stared at Lovelian. I have already obtained permission from Aratha's royal family and parliament. Rather than tearing at each other's faces over this issue, wouldn't it be a lot cleaner to allow us to interrogate and punish him? Of course it isn't clean, Lovelian still objected. It seems like you misunderstand something. The council has no intention of relying on the Lionheart name to push this matter. Since the Lionheart's eldest son was involved in this incident, we've already agreed to show enough sincerity to Arath. Besides, the price of that sinner's life is worth nothing. Since Carmen had said all that, Lovelian could no longer raise any objections. Magic research required a lot of money. For this reason, substantial tourist fees were set for all of the tourist attractions in the capital city of Pentagon. On top of that, rather than making money by revealing and utilizing the magic they had studied, most wizards were the type to hole up and devote themselves to research. He didn't know how much money the Lionheart clan must have paid for the right to interrogate and punish the criminal, but the council must have paid a large enough bribe that no one had sought to refuse. As such, what are you going to do? Carmen prompted. Are you going to take the deal? I don't have much time, so answer quickly. I'll take it, Melkith replied with a frown, even as she thought, so they want to go by hours instead of days? That works out better for me since 3 hours should already be enough. Thanks to this condition, no matter how long it might feel, she would be able to get her cloak of darkness back within 2 months. As Melkith signed the contract, she held back the urge to burst into laughter. Chapter 50. After Melkith had made her decision, they immediately finalized the contract. The contract wasn't simply written down on paper, but created by magic so that even an archwizard like Melkith couldn't get out of it. What happens if I somehow destroy the cloak? Eugene asked out of curiosity. Melkith was the one who answered him, you'll just have to recompense me for the value of the cloak. You don't need to worry since I won't ask you to give your life for it. Frankly, she wasn't really in a position to even request something like that. Although Eugene might not be an heir, the opposite party was still an adopted son of the Lionheart's main family. If she made such an unreasonable request, it was obvious that she would be making an enemy of the Lionheart clan, and Melkith wouldn't want that to happen. Though that sort of thing couldn't happen in the first place, Melkith said as an afterthought. The Cloak of Darkness was specifically designed to be a top-notch defensive artifact. If the cloak was destroyed while you were wearing it, then you'd probably be dead. Kid, do you get what I'm trying to say? You meant that if I don't want to die, I should be careful? Eugene confirmed quizzically. That's right. Don't swagger around while trusting in its defenses and keep it low-key. It's okay if you want to wear it to a fancy party, but don't go fighting in it. If he was only allowed to use it like that, why would he even need a cloak like this? Eugene snorted and swung the Cloak of Darkness onto his shoulders. Its design is impressive, Carmen spoke up from her window seat. She still kept the unlit cigar in her mouth as she said, I especially like the thick fur around the collar. It reminds me of the symbol of our Lionheart clan, the lion's mane. I guess it does resemble that, Eugene politely agreed. But it's a shame that the fur is colored black. If the fur was dyed white like the flames of the White Flame formula, or if it was dyed gray, it would look much more impressive. The current fur color seems to suit someone from the Knights of the Black Lion much better, Carmen critiqued. Without saying anything, Eugene faced Carmen with a blank expression. Carmen also stared at Eugene without saying another word. After they exchanged stares like this for a few moments, Seal, who was sitting next to him, poked Eugene in the side. Hand it over, she hissed. Why should I? Eugene asked petulantly. Didn't you hear her say she wants to try it on? But I don't think she said something like that. She doesn't necessarily have to put it into words for you to get what she meant. What kind of nonsense was Seal spouting now? Although Eugene didn't really understand, he was feeling an annoying pressure from Carmen's gaze. Please try it on, Eugene reluctantly offered as he took off the cloak, and Carmen immediately walked over. While putting on an expression of blatant indifference, she took the cloak that Eugene had offered her and wrapped it around her body in a flourish. It's not bad, Carmen said as she glanced at her reflection in the window and slowly went through a series of poses. Eugene eyed Carmen's back as she did this. Although he'd seen a lot of elders in both his past and present lives, this was his first time seeing such a unique elder like Carmen, who seemed unable to act her age. I think it would be even better if you used a lion-shaped brooch to clasp it across your chest. You could also have the lion heart sigil embroidered on the back, Carmen suggested. From the way you're talking, it's like I'm giving it to you. Don't get the wrong idea. I'm only lending it to you, remember? Don't mess around with my cloak, Melkith, who had been gazing down at We with greedy eyes, shouted in protest. However, Carmen didn't show any reaction to Melkith's cry. After continuing to be absorbed with her reflection in the window for a few more moments, she finally took off the cloak after Nashon pointedly coughed several times. It's about time. Let's go, Carmen declared. Yes, sir, Nashon said with a sigh of relief as he rose from his seat. He had been worried that Carmen might head off without first taking off the cloak. But fortunately, it seemed like Carmen wasn't about to do something so shameless and embarrassing. Seal, before leaving the drawing room, Guillaume called out Seal's name. Yes, I'll make sure to wait with Eugene, Seal readily replied with a grin as if she had been waiting for this. Unlike Seal's smile, Guillaume had a somewhat reluctant expression. However, Eugene wasn't able to ask him his reason for this because Carmen immediately exited the drawing room without giving them a chance to chat. After Carmen and the other knights of the Black Lion had left, Melkith leaped to her feet and said, I'm also heading off. She was hugging We to her chest and smiling so widely that her cheeks were twitching. It definitely won't take as long as you expect, Melkith gloated. Maybe half a day at the most? Then I'll also go with you, Eugene proposed. Melkith refused. No way. Who said that you could do that? Kid, this is about a contract with a spirit. Although the summoner's affinity with the spirit is important, the location and the setting are also important. Therefore, if you had to compare it, you could see it as a meeting with a prospective spouse. Eugene grunted in confusion. Just think about it. How would you feel if you arrived at the appointed meeting place all excited, only to find some unknown scrub hanging around with the person you're supposed to meet? I don't think it would make that much of a difference. Maybe they'll just consider me as the person who arranged the blind date. Don't you have any experience with such things? Experience with meeting prospective marriage partners. I'm only 17. Don't prestigious families often arrange such meetings at a much younger age than that? That's what I've read in romance novels. Please don't confuse fiction with reality. You really haven't? As always, reality fails to live up to fiction. Melkith stopped mumbling and turned to face him. In any case, there's no way you can come with me. Now that I'm about to seduce the Spirit King of the Wind, what will I do if he sees that you're there as well and refuses to make a contract with me? Wouldn't that be impolite to the Spirit King? But I also want to see the Wind Spirit King in person, Eugene complained. Melkith boasted, don't worry, once we've signed a contract, I'll let you see him when I return. Eugene nodded in agreement. Just as Melkith had said, it seemed unlikely that Tempest would appear if he was with her. To be honest, it was hard to understand her simile about it being like meeting with a prospective marriage partner and whatnot. But Tempest was already aware that Eugene was Hamel yet refused to answer his summons. That son of a bitch, he's definitely hiding something from me. When they had met 4 years ago, Tempest had claimed that he didn't know anything, but Eugene definitely couldn't trust those words. Although he might not know anything about the Oath of Peace, he should be aware of what happened before the fight with the Demon King of Incarceration. Eugene decided that he at least needed to ask Tempest about that. After Melkith left, the only ones left in the drawing room were Eugene, Lovelian, and Seal. Lovelian belatedly realized, apologies for my late greeting, Miss Seal. Hasn't it been 4 years since we last met? Seal smiled politely, yes, sir. When Eugene had seen her a few months ago, she had definitely been caught in the throes of puberty, leading her to self-isolate in her room. But she seemed to have gotten over that phase as Seal nodded at Lovelian with a bright smile. While looking at the 17-year-old Seal, Lovelian keenly felt the passing of time. Although he had also felt this when he reunited with Eugene, children seem to grow up very quickly these days. Seal showed hardly any traces of the childishness he had felt from her 4 years ago. "Did you say you've come here to pick something out for Lady Ancilla's birthday?" Lovelian asked. "Yes, sir." "Oh, and every single one of the gifts you have sent me over the years, Sir Lovelian, is decorating my room beautifully," Seal reported as she smiled charmingly. "Haha, I've always enjoyed reading the letters of thanks you sent me, Miss Seal. I had just been thinking that it was strange you haven't sent me one this year. Perhaps you didn't like the gift I sent you?" "No, it's nothing like that." Though it had been an awkward question, Seal just shook her head while maintaining a smile. "Although it's embarrassing for me to admit this myself. Since the beginning of this year, my personality has become sensitive in various ways. The gift you sent me was beautiful, but strangely I just didn't want to pick up a pen and write you a letter," Seal explained. "I understand. At your age, young lady, the days for those things can come quite suddenly." Lovelian readily accepted her excuse without feeling offended. Lovelian had never had any children of his own, so he couldn't understand a father's grievances, but there had been several times when he was forced to listen to Gilead's sorrows of having to watch his only daughter go through puberty. "And by this point I felt it would be rude of me to write a letter and send it to you," Seal continued. "But even so, I would feel sorry to have taken your gift for granted. Especially since it feels like you won't be sending me any more gifts from next year onwards." Seal smiled mischievously as she reached into her pocket. She pulled out what seemed to be a neatly wrapped gift box and said, "So I've picked out a gift that I thought would suit you, Sir Lovelian. It isn't much, but I bought it after saving my allowance." Lovelian sucked in a breath of surprise. "Oh? Please open it up quickly," Seal urged with a soft smile. Lovelian felt an unfamiliar yet warm feeling deep in his heart. Was this why people got married and had children? He hadn't thought anything of the idea when he was listening to Gilead gush over how proud he was of his children, but now that he was receiving a gift like this, Lovelian felt like he was becoming overwhelmed with emotions. "This is..." Lovelian's voice and eyes trembled when he opened the gift box. Inside the box was a tie pin with a neat design. As Seal had said, it couldn't really be called anything amazing. It seemed well crafted enough that it might be a bit expensive, but an item like this could easily be bought as long as you had the money. However, Lovelian sensed a sentiment that far exceeded the price of this gift. He had never received a gift like this before in his life. Seal commented, "At first I thought I should give you a gift that has something to do with magic since you are a wizard. However, after thinking about it some more, I felt that you would already have a lot of stuff like that." Lovelian remained silent. "But then, after a lot of thought, I realized that you are always wearing robes. However, I thought that just because it's you, Sir Lovelian, there's no way that you will always be wearing robes." "I'll be right back after I've changed my clothes," Lovelian said as he leaped to his feet, interrupting Seal, who immediately giggled and shook her head. "Please don't do that. Instead of showing me how it looks on you right now, please wear it for my birthday party next year," Seal requested. "Why do I need to wait until next year?" Lovelian asked sulkily. He really wanted to try it on immediately. Hearing Lovelian plead in a trembling voice, Seal continued speaking, "Because it's a gift that I gave you. Although I'm not sure if you'll be attending my mother's birthday party, please don't wear it then either and instead wear it to my birthday party. That way I'll be able to brag about it to Cyan and the other guests. Even after going through puberty, you're still as wicked as ever," Eugene thought with a grin as he glanced over at the smiling Seal. Although Eugene was also quite confident in dealing with adults, he was absolutely sure he couldn't compete with Seal in this. Lovelian gave in, "Alright, I understand. Miss Seal, by any chance, are there any gifts that you would like to receive next year?" "I'll be happy with anything you give me, Sir Lovelian. But please don't be too generous with any present you give me. My brother gets jealous." "So what if he gets jealous?" Lovelian had no intention of paying any attention to that. Following the bloodline continuation ceremony, he had sent a gift to the twins at the main estate every year, and like Seal, Cyan had also sent him thank you notes. However, Cyan's letters had always been so formulaic that even now Lovelian couldn't recall their contents if he tried. "Humph." Lovelian came to his senses with a grunt after staring at the tie pin with a fascination for a bit. He looked up at the clock hanging on the drawing room's wall and smiled disappointedly. It looks like I've been holding you two up for far too long, he apologized. Please don't say such a thing, Seal begged. Really saying that you're the one holding us up. Instead, we should be the ones apologizing for stealing your precious time. How was she able to speak in such a charming manner? Lovelian shook his head in amazement as he stood up. Lovelian waved off her apology. No, not at all. I would much prefer to continue enjoying our chat a bit longer, Miss Seal. But since you have affairs to see to, let's end our talk here. But I'm fine with staying a bit longer. Seal trailed off hesitantly. I'm afraid not. I too must return to work, Lovelian admitted. In order to confirm the Knights of the Black Lion's claims, it looked like he would need to show his face at the council for once. Since Lovelian had said this, Seal could no longer refuse him. Eugene slowly began. If that's the case, then I'm also head. Where do you think you're going? You need to come with me, Seal demanded. Why should I do that? Eugene protested. Because this is my first time in Arath. As such, don't you think that you should show me around? Seal pointed out. I'd also appreciate it if you could do so, Eugene, Lovelian added. Having gotten his hands on the Cloak of Darkness, Eugene had hoped to go down to the laboratories to test its performance. But Lovelian had already added his support to Seal's words. Eugene smoothed out his furrowed brows and helplessly nodded in agreement. You really were lying through your teeth. Eugene turned to Seal and accused her as soon as they had left the Red Tower of Magic. After all, I know for a fact that you've shoved all the gifts that head wizard Lovelian has sent you into a corner of your room. And how is that a lie? Seal challenged him. Didn't you say that they were decorating your room? You just feel that way because you've got quite the poor sense of interior design. In your eyes, it might look like I just tossed them into a corner, but in my eyes, all of them are in their proper places as decorations. Was that really the case? Eugene felt her claims were absurd, but he couldn't figure out how to refute Seal's words. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed like she had just crammed them out of sight. But could they really have been arranged as part of her decoration? But I think they were covered in dust the last time I saw them. Eugene recalled hesitantly. Seal insisted, that's just because you weren't looking properly. Do you really think I'd let my room get dusty? Something like that is impossible. If that really was the case, I'll immediately call my attendants and scold them as soon as I get back to the main estate. Now that I give it a second thought, it seems like there wasn't any dust. I guess it must have been a pretty memorable experience. Seal smirked as she casually drew closer to Eugene. What was, he asked. I'm talking about you coming into my room, Seal clarified suggestively. It seems like it was so memorable that you can clearly remember every single thing that you saw there. Eugene interrupted her. Sorry, but I've always had a good memory. I even remember everything I saw when I last visited Cyan's room. Now that it's been brought up, when you see Cyan, tell him to get rid of the strange books that he's been hiding under his bed. Caught off guard, Seal belatedly responded, What? Cyan still seems to believe that he's done such a great job hiding them so that no one else can find them. But it's not just me. Even Nina knows that he's been collecting some pornography about women wearing strange bunny-eared headbands. Ever since he was 15 years old. That's disgusting. Right? Nina was distraught that someday, when Cyan becomes the patriarch, he might change the maids' uniforms to include bunny-eared headbands and stockings of different colors. I'll pass your words on to my mother. But that's a little. Eugene's reply trailed off with a troubled expression. If the strict Ancilla got wind of it, it was clear that she would soon grab Cyan by the ear and scold him silly. But if that really happened, Cyan might just commit suicide out of shame. You should just try and insinuate it to him, Eugene recommended. What should I say? Seal asked, puzzled. Just say that you don't particularly like bunny ears. Eugene started striding off, having successfully changed the subject. After blinking her eyes in surprise at Eugene, Seal quickly caught up with a hurried pace. If that's the case, what type of ears do you like? Seal probed. Eugene eyed her warily. Why would you ask something like that? You've said that you don't particularly like bunny ears. If that's the case, what kind of ears do you like? Sorry, but I just prefer ordinary ears. If you really think about it, don't you find it a bit weird and disturbing? If they have rabbit ears growing out from the tops of their heads, what on earth could there be in the places where ears usually go? Couldn't it just be featureless? If you saw something like that in real life, wouldn't you find it creepy? If that's the case, what if they just have ordinary ears in the usual spots? That means they would have both a pair of human ears and a pair of rabbit ears? Isn't that kind of disturbing as well? Seal hadn't expected such a reply. With a sour look, she cleared her throat and said, "Let's stop with the useless talk and go pick out a present for my mother." "But I don't even know what Lady Ancilla likes," Eugene complained. "But I do, so why should that matter? You just need to follow me. If you're just going to have me follow you, why ask me to act as your guide? You really do lack any courtesy. Then do you want me to just wander around all on my own? You're going to abandon me in the capital of a foreign country, which I've never been to in my life, a place I know nothing about. What do you mean by abandon? After all, it's not like you can't take care of yourself. Even if you say that, everyone knows you're supposed to be following me," Seal warned him. "Then I guess it can't be helped. I'm sure that if I needlessly blow you off, I'll be hearing about this for ages," Eugene grumbled as he unclasped the cloak of darkness. Although it was still too early in the season to wear a cloak like this that was bristling with fur, thanks to the various spells imbued into the cape, he could avoid feeling the heat even if he was in a desert. "Come to think of it, it was your birthday last month," Seal suddenly said. "That's right," Eugene confirmed. "Did you do anything for your birthday? How about a party?" "I didn't do anything. I was just reading books." "Books? Inside the library of the Red Tower of Magic? You really didn't have a party? And you didn't get any presents from anyone?" "I didn't get any. Although Head Wizard Lovelian and Miss Hera offered to get me some, I begged them not to because I would feel embarrassed." "Who's Hera?" "A wizard of the Red Tower of Magic." "Is Hera a woman?" "Her name is Hera, so did you really think she would be a man?" "What does she look like?" "Like a wizard." "And what do you mean when you say she looks like a wizard?" "I meant it literally. She's always wearing robes, donning a tall hat and holding a staff." "What about her looks?" Just as Eugene was feeling bothered about how to answer her question, he saw Hera walking down the other side of the street. She was hugging a large bag full of bread while breathing in the scent of the baguettes. "That's Hera over there," he pointed out. "Oh my, Sir Eugene," came an answering cry. Having just spotted Eugene, Hera smiled widely and waved her hand at him. In that brief moment, Seal scanned Hera's appearance from head to toe. Then she smiled innocently as if what had just happened was an illusion and bowed deeply to Hera. "I am Seal of the Lionheart clan," she introduced herself. Hera exclaimed, "Wah! I am Hera Strilla from the Red Tower of Magic." Hera was unable to immediately process the situation and glanced at Eugene for help. "She came along with the Knights of the Black Lion," Eugene explained. "Oh, for the Cloak of Darkness. It seems that the deal went through swiftly." "Yep. Originally I was planning to head down to the laboratories, but she kept begging me to go with her." Hera felt Seal's subtle gaze rest on her. "Ahem," she cleared her throat with a low cough and nodded in understanding. "I hope you two have a good time." "Huh." Eugene made a confused noise. Hera didn't see any need to say anything further. With quick steps she ducked around Eugene. After looking at Hera's back for a few moments, Seal nodded and said, "She seems like a nice person." Still confused, Eugene hesitated. You're right. She is a good person. It might be because of the smell of her bread, but I'm feeling hungry." "Then why don't we get something to eat first?" As Eugene resumed his paused stride, he glanced at Seal and said, "But did you really come all the way to Aroth just to buy presents? Didn't I say I was here to see you as well?" Seal reminded him. "But apart from that, I've known you for 4 years. Did you really think that I couldn't read your reactions? It's not like it's some huge secret. So what do you want to do with Lady Carmen? You really do notice the strangest things. You're just too obvious." "I'm in the middle of requesting her to take me as her squire," Seal replied with a shrug of defeat. "Since in any case my brother is going to become the patriarch and I have no desire for the position myself. Although it seems like Mother wants me to enter an arranged marriage." For a moment there, Seal peeked at Eugene's expression. However, Eugene's face didn't show any changes. "I hate the idea of arranged marriages. But I don't want to be locked up in the main estate either and forced to act like a lady," Seal continued. "So that's why you want to join the Knights of the Black Lion?" Eugene confirmed. "Although I cannot join right now, I want to become Lady Carmen's squire and receive her personal guidance." "And has Lady Carmen accepted your request?" "If she truly didn't like me, then she wouldn't have allowed me to accompany her here. Although you might not be aware of it, Lady Carmen has been fond of me since I was a little girl, Seal bragged with a smirk. Eugene recalled Carmen's stark-looking, or rather pretending to be stark-looking, face. That's good, he concluded. Seal asked, what is? It's good to see you looking for something you can do yourself rather than just relying on the main family. How's Cyan doing? He keeps talking about you. He also pulled me aside to talk about you before I left to come here. About what? But my brother asked me to keep it a secret. It looks like you're going to tell me anyway, so how secret can it be? He wanted me to find out what star of the white flame formula you've reached. The third star. It's still the same as before. What about Cyan? He's on the second star, Seal revealed. Well, that means that he hasn't progressed either, Eugene replied with a grin. Unlike that hopeless Yuid, it looked like the twins were working quite hard. Eugene was quite happy to see this. Cyan's inferiority complex was fueling his training, and while still as wicked and manipulative as ever, Seal didn't have a nasty personality that looked down on others. Only Yuid had grown up to be a dog. 1. Have you heard any news from our older brother? Eugene asked. I heard that he's gone back to his maternal relative's house. Don't know and don't care, Seal spat out with a furrowed brow. Although my mother was very pleased to hear of Yuid's fall from grace, it just pisses me off. It also put my brother in a bad mood. Eugene pressed, but you should have still heard some news, shouldn't you? I've heard that Lady Tanis might be looking for a wizard to hire as a tutor, Seal admitted. A tutor? Eugene repeated in confusion. Funny, isn't it? Even though he did something so foolish, I guess they still want him to learn magic. Even though they should just let him do what he likes since he won't be able to become the patriarch anyway, Seal mumbled as she clung to Eugene's arm. Let's stop discussing such upsetting topics and get something to eat. Isn't there a good restaurant nearby? There's a lot of restaurants, but their food probably tastes worse than the main estate's cooking, Eugene warned her. The taste doesn't matter, Seal said with a roll of her eyes as she looked up at Eugene. In the first place, when it comes to good food, it isn't just taste but the atmosphere is also important. 1. This feels like a reference to the Asian idiom, a lion does not give birth to a dog. The idiom implies that the children of great people aren't ordinary either. Only in this case, Yuid has failed to live up to this ideal, while the twins have been successful.